Good afternoon and welcome to day 49 of 365 Days of Stories with Theo Mayer. 49, multiple of 7, here we are. It's a Saturday and this is my day to tell stories from my own life as a steward. And I left off with some stories basically about being in Montana. And I think we're talking about food a little bit. Well, let me tell you about milk cows. Milk cows are really, really amazing animals. And what a thing in the morning, on a cold morning, to go down to the milk barn, milk cows. Dave Garber would come over early in the morning. It was the first thing he did, at least that I knew of in the morning. He would come over and he'd open the door of the bunkhouse, and they called me Teddy Blue. And he'd be like, Teddy Blue, time to get up. There's fire on the mountain. Meant the sun was shining on the mountain. It's time to get up. And off he'd go. He had a stainless steel milk bucket under his arm. He'd head off toward the barn, which was probably about, 40 yards away or so from bunkhouse. Big red barn. And in one section of it was a place where you could bring in milk cows, and there were enough stalls, or they weren't really stalls, but places where the cows would come in, and there was a slot, that was about this big wide in front of them, and into that you would put their grain or whatever food you were going to coax them in with. Now, they'd stick their head in between these wooden boards that were at an angle like this. So their head would come in between so they could eat that grain. And when they did, one of the boards was on a hinge at the bottom, a little wooden peg, and it would move like this, and you locked it in at the top, and now the cow couldn't get its head out without breaking the wood, which probably could easily have done, but it tended not to do, because it knew that it was sort of stuck. And then the cow was in place. There was a slot at the back end of the cow as well, for whenever the cow, made cow manure, the cow manure or the urine would go into this slot. And the floor was tilted a little bit. It was concrete. It was tilted a little bit. So everything would run into that slot, and then you would just take a shovel and scoop it out. There was a little hole in the barn where it would just scoop it outside. And then eventually, you'd come in and pick it up, and it would be spread out. That manure would be spread out over the fields to enrich the soil, or used in the garden, one of the two. There's nothing better than some herbivores' manure to enrich soil, enrich your gardens. In fact, if you look into biodynamic farming, permaculture, any of these things, it's like hoofed animals, herbivores are typically a big part of the macrocosm that a farm becomes. It's important. It's an important animal. It eats greens and then transforms that green into something that is the best fertilizer you could possibly ever imagine. So anyway, now that's a whole other avenue that could be looked into. Manure. Oh my gosh, what great stuff. The one thing I always wanted to do on the place that I lived on eventually was create a situation where you took feces of animals, including yourself, and turned it into a digester, a methane digester. So it turned that, you can add vegetable matters, your compost, whatever, into that, and the gas that it makes becomes a gas that you can use to run your hot water heater or your gas stove. Ingenious. Well, they do it at garbage dumps too. So anyway, milk cows. Early in the morning to get up, Dave would come. I'd go down to the barn. In the beginning, I had no clue as to how to milk a cow. And you got to be kind of, right on with a cow. So the stool that Dave or we sat on, it was a one-legged stool, okay? So it was a little piece of round wood that you could fit your booty on, and then there was one leg coming down from it. You'd put that down and you'd sit down on it right away. And of course you have your two legs, so it becomes like a three-legged stool. And you've got to balance on that one-legged stool. It was kind of a cool thing to do. And but it took a little bit to get used to. And as you're balancing on that stool, you put the bucket in between your legs and you hold it between your knees. So your hands are free, the bucket's right there, and you're underneath the cow a little bit. Now, you better hope that that cow likes you, because if the cow doesn't like you, its hooves are right there. We had one cow, she was a Jersey, and then another cow that was a brown Swiss. So the two of those cows came in. They both, okay, in order to have cow's milk, you got to have a calf. So the cow has to give birth to a calf in order for it to be making the milk. The cool thing, Dave did not keep the calves away from the cows all the time. Well, the cows were allowed in both in the morning and the evening to nurse about half of the milk away. So Dave would milk one half the cow and the calf would milk the other half the cow, and there was plenty of milk for, all of the people there at the ranch. So anyway, Heidi was the name of the brown Swiss, and I'm trying to remember the name of the Jersey, and I can't right now. Maybe it'll come to me. She would kick. She had the milk. So Jersey milk had the most cream in it. It was the richest milk, and it was great for making butter. And Judy used to make the butter from the cream, and she used to sell it to people. Anyway, so you'd go down there and, you'd milk the cows one at a time. Typically there was one bucket, and Dave would sit at one stool, and there were various ways of milking the cows depending on what the teats were like. Anybody that's milked a goat or a cow knows this. I'm telling you this. So, the teats could be small, very small, or could be large. The brown Swiss had very big teats that you could put all four of your fingers on. And the Jersey had teats that were small. They could only fit 2 fingers on it. And with the Jersey cow, you'd do a stripping technique, and where you'd strip the teat. You'd have your 2 hands working and you'd strip that teat. And every time you'd strip it, you'd get a squirt of milk into the bucket. Now, it was important when the cow liked you. How do you get a cow to like you? One, you talk to it nicely. You maybe, pat its back. But you want to work its teats in such a way that it doesn't hurt it. And you don't want to pull on it. You don't want to have super rough hands. If there was dryness, we would use something called bag balm. It was in a little green square container with a lid. It was kind of like Vaseline almost, but you'd put some of that on the teat and it allowed your fingers to kind of slide and slip easily over that teat. And so, you just milk that cow until you get those 2 teats dry. Now the calf got to come in and get the other side. One thing that Dave taught me, however, was that if that cow was not open to giving you milk, because they can kind of hold it back, if you let in the calf, you can be guaranteed that that milk is going to start flowing. So if I ever had trouble, if I was there by myself, let's say milking, and the cow didn't want to give me milk, I'd let in the calf. The calf would be on one side sucking away, and I'd be like, milking the other side as quickly as I could, because that calf was way faster than I was at milking the cow. I did get faster as I went along in time. The brown Swiss is a little bit easier, and you could get, like I said, all 4 of these fingers on one side, and you'd kind of put them against your hand here, and you'd start at the top and you'd work your fingers down each time, milking the milk out. And that bucket was amazing how quickly you'd fill that bucket up. Now, there were other animals that loved milk. And if you think of an animal that you might see at a farm that's going to want milk. What comes to mind? That's right, cats. So anytime milking happened, there'd be at least 3 cats there along the edge just waiting in hopes they were going to get a little milk or someone's going to spill. I did have the bucket kicked right out from under me on more than one occasion by that Jersey cow. I always milked her first because I knew Heidi was not going to kick it out of me. So I'd definitely end up with at least Heidi's milk by the end of the milking. But as the cats were there, it was always kind of fun you'd aim a teat over at the cat and try to squirt the cat with the milk and get it in its fur, and then it would lick the milk off the fur. And they seemed to really enjoy that because, every time we milked, they were there waiting for a squirt of milk. So anyway, finished with the milking. If everything went well, you would have milked half the cow, let the calf in to finish the job, and the calf would work on both sides. When the calf was done, and usually you're kind of waiting at that point, waiting around for things to end. You let the cows out, off they go. And they had about 2-3 acre pasture that they lived in, just the cows. The calves were separated from them during the day because if the calves were in with them, there would be no milk by the afternoon milking. So off we would go with the milk up to the back porch of where Ron and Judy lived with their 3 girls. And in there, in that room, was this thing called an extractor. You'd pour the milk through a filter. It would go into the extractor. And you wouldn't pour the milk in until you began to hand crank this extractor. It had all these little discs in it that lined up. And as the milk went through the extractor, it spun at very high speed and separated the milk from the cream. So you'd end up with skim milk and cream, which of course then, the cream alone, my God, you get fresh cream, put that in your coffee or your morning drink. There was nothing like fresh cream. Nothing that you get in the stores compares with fresh milk. Having a fresh, warm glass of milk that hadn't been separated yet, was the most delicious. It is the most delicious. But how many people have milk cows these days? It wasn't very long ago that a lot of people had milk cows. In fact, a 102-year-old friend of mine, Rose Cunningham, once told me, back in those days, Theo, we all had gardens and mini farms on our properties. We didn't have cell phones, she said. I was like, what? She said, it was in the gardens, in the orchards. That's where we all met and talked with each other. That's where information was shared. That's where we learned what was going on, not through these cell phones, said Rose Cunningham. 102 years old, and that was probably 2 years ago. So let's go back 104 years. That's quite a long time ago. That was like, 1918? Okay. Anyway, extract the milk. You've got skim milk now and cream. The cream goes to making butter, which was churned. Judy had some churn thing that was in a jar, paddles that would spin around, turn it into buttermilk and butter. And then the skim milk would often go down to the hogs. They would get the skim milk because they just didn't use the skim milk for much. If you were going to have milk in your house, you saved a bit of the whole milk before it went through the extractor. There was a little valve that you could turn, and after it had been filtered, from any hair or manure that got into the milk, any dirt that got into the milk, it would be filtered out through just a little cloth filter, and you'd have some beautiful whole milk to drink for whatever you needed. So anyway, wow, there's milk in a cow. This is all of just one story for the day. The one thing I didn't mention, a cold day. Imagine resting your head up against a warm cow as you started milking. It was the most beautiful thing to do. Beautiful. Warm head, warm cow. We're missing out, folks, in these modern days that we're living in. Okay, have a good rest of your day. We'll continue next week.